and welcome back to another episode of Jason's Game Room, the only podcast here on YouTube that talks about everything gaming, from board games to dice games to CCGs to video games. I did an episode on Pog. Look at me go! If it has anything to do in the world about gaming, it's going to be on this show, and you're going to want to keep tuning in to see what I'm on about next. Now, that being said, this episode has been put together due to requests from a couple listeners, and I want to talk to you about Star Trek Online, because if you've been a hardcore Star Trek fan over the years, as I have, and no, I'm not talking about the new stuff, that's another argument for another show and another day, you will have played, or have begun to play, or have already played Star Trek Online. This was a huge open-world, PC-based game that you'd play over the internet, and it was a lot of fun. I played it for a few years before I ended up getting bored of it. And as unfortunate as that is, yes, I do get bored of things, even if I do enjoy them thoroughly. And I never really returned to playing it, but for the few years I played it, or less, it was really fun. And if you're a big Star Trek fan of the original stuff, so TOS, TNG, DS9, Voyager, everything from that era, you'll notice that in the story for Star Trek Online, when you're proceeding through missions and such, that there are references to episodes of previous series as well as stories and loose ends that are tied up. A couple of the biggest examples would be the Enterprise C from the episode Yesterday's Enterprise in TNG. When it went back through the rift at the end of the episode, you thought, okay, the timeline is restored, everyone's back to normal. But Star Trek Online shows us that the Enterprise C actually went into the future quite far before being finally put back to the past where it belonged. And in that mission, you meet up with members of the Enterprise C crew, a couple that featured prominently in that episode, and you help them to get the ship back, and you use the ship to escape from where it is and send it back into the past. Another good example is if you remember one of the later TNG episodes that dealt with Worf's son Alexander arriving back to the past from the future, and he took the identity of Kimtar, and he went back in time to try to change his own path so that he'd be able to save his father and not be a wimp. In Star Trek Online, you see the loose ends being tied up that he does indeed end up saving his father's life, even though he's an ambassador at that point. And it's a really cool little storyline that takes you back into that episode of TNG and remind you of everything that went down. Star Trek Online did that very well. It would add in elements of episodes from certain shows into the missions, and you'd be a part of that, and you'd finish up the storylines per se. The other fun part about Star Trek Online that I really enjoyed was not so much just doing the missions, but actually flying from system to system in your starship, encountering things, exploring, getting into battles, things like that, beaming yourself into certain stations and star bases and wandering around and interacting with other people. I believe that Star Trek Online was ahead of its time. And even with some of the glitches it had, it was a very fun game. You could customize characters, uniforms, things like that, do stuff to your ship. You could wander around your ship or the star base. There are always things to pick up and people to talk about and friends to make. It was one of those games that was a treat to play, even though I only played it for a few short years. That being said, it did suffer from a few issues, and one of the main issues with Star Trek Online is that it's not canon. Even though it does wrap up loose ends and storylines, and it takes elements from the different TV series and some of the movies, it's not canon, and I've never been a fan of a lot of the ship designs that were made specifically for that game. And I'm sorry, but they are not considered canon. And all those people out there who want the Odyssey class Enterprise F to be considered canon, it just can't, because it would create too many continuity issues and problems with the franchise as a whole if that were to be allowed somewhere on a TV screen near you or added to canon. And people have to understand that the way the timeline works for Star Trek in general, even though we're almost at the 25th century in the TV series, which I'm not really paying attention to now because they're garbage, in my opinion, the Enterprise E would still be around. The thing was built to last for a hell of a long time, at least 100 years. And think about it. It beat the crap out of the Borg. It survived being assimilated. It survived an all-out assault by the Sona and losing its warp core. It crashed into the Scimitar in Nemesis, ramming everything in sight and taking a pounding. I'm sorry, the Enterprise D isn't going anywhere. So let's dispense with the fact that every ship from Star Trek Online should be included in canon. There are some nice designs in that game that I enjoyed using or looking at, but a lot of those ships, I'm sorry to say this, and I'm going to probably get some nasty feedback, but a lot of those ships in Star Trek Online that were designed for that game are trash. They never look good. They never felt as Star Trek as some of the classic ships that were put in that game. And that brings me to another point in which the some of the uniform styles that were used in that game as well. Now, I didn't use a set uniform. I used a mashup uniform that kind of looked like a Voyager-style uniform, but had, where the division color would be on the shoulders, it was white and had the color as a stripe around the trim because I thought that was cool. Or I alternated to my Voyager DS9 style uniform once in a while, or First Contact, because those are the best uniforms designs that are out there. I don't like some of the mashups that were made for the game because they don't even look Star Trek-y or Starfleetish, if I can use those words. They seem to be put together hastily just to appease people that couldn't be happy with everything that was already available. And while I do agree customization of characters and ships in the game are what made it enjoyable, I think it went a little too far and people went a little nuts with it. Like, there's personalization, and then there's just making a ship or a uniform look so outlandish it doesn't even look Star Trek. And if you see some of the uniforms in the recent shows like Star Trek Picard, where they've kind of deviated from a more business style type uniform that looks proper, and they've kind of added frills to it and made it look weird. And the main Star Trek Online uniform that has that weird shoulder crest, and it has the pips made into weird looking trapezoids on the breast of the uniform. There's people that have made cosplay uniforms for conventions of the Star Trek Online style uniform. They just don't look good from any angle. I'm sorry. Like, I understand they wanted to come up with something unique for the game, but it's just not the same. There's been too much tinkering and too much personalization going, and you have to understand that when Star Trek first came out with the original series in the 60s, they were limited to the budgets and the technology they had at the time. So the uniforms were basic, but they still looked good. TNG took it to a whole new level with those spandex things in the first couple seasons, but the uniforms look cool with the shoulder and the stripes and everything. And then they made them better for the later seasons of TNG. And then the jumpsuits came out in DS9. I wasn't fully happy with those until Voyager came along, because then it kind of looked cool. And then when First Contact came out and went to the gray and black uniform with the division colors on the undershirt and the shoulder cuffs, that was really snappy. And the dress uniforms that came out in Insurrection, even snappier. I loved that. Even the Admiral's uniforms that came out looked really damn good with the belt buckle and everything. But I think that's one of my huge problems why I stopped playing Star Trek Online, is because the design of a lot of things just got too ridiculous. Now, to each his or her own for sure, but everything lately has kind of gotten away from Star Trek and gotten mental. And that's not just my opinion, that's a lot of people's opinion. And that's, Star Trek Online helped to turn me off of Star Trek after a while, because the design of things just got a little too overboard. I'm all for simplicity and adding here and there and maybe refining, but when you just keep making variations that don't look as good, and partially responsible for me stopping with Star Trek Online was the fact that a lot of the missions started getting that way, and the add-on packs for the game, everything just got a little sillier as time went on. I liked the original incarnation of the game and the original missions before all the add-ons came out, and just kind of cheapened the game. And I know I'm going to take flack for this, but I played it for 3 years almost daily because I enjoyed it, but then it just kind of soured me, just like the new Star Trek series have soured me on Star Trek as a whole. And that's why I only go back and watch the original 4 series and the first 10 or 11 movies. just because. Well, actually, the first 10 movies, because in my opinion, everything after Nemesis is garbage. But anyways, that's another story for a different show. Overall, Star Trek Online was a very, very well-designed game. And it's a lot of fun to play. The missions are great to a certain extent. And I like the freedom involved in the game. It's like playing Grand Theft Auto 5, but on a much more massive scale. And you can just wander around. You don't even have to do anything. You can wander around and just see what other people are doing. And work on your ship if you want. It's great. I've spent time in that game, hours, where I've just gone on there and just warped from one system to another just for the hell of warping around because it's fun. I'm curious to know from all of you people out there that have played it as well what your thoughts and opinions are. And I'd like to see some comments in the comments section to see if you enjoyed the game or not, or what you think could have been improved or done differently with the game. Because instead of me going on about the highs, the lows, and the downright dirty today, I'd rather hear from everybody else and get your opinions on it, because you already know my opinions from listening to the basis of the show. And I'm more curious to hear what you have to say, because if you ask 1,000 different people, you're going to get 1,000 different opinions, but you're also going to learn things in the process. I'm not trying to knock Star Trek Online. I'm just saying that it did have its time, and I think it's gone a little overboard, and I'm probably not the only person that has stopped playing it to a certain extent because of that. That's all for today's show. I don't want to keep droning on forever, and I thank everybody for listening, and I appreciate all the input you're hopefully going to give me in the comment section afterwards. Everybody have a great day, take care, and of course, game on!